In this video, I'm not just going to explain why the movie Dark City is a great metaphor for Plato's cave, but also for Carlos Castaneda's interpretation of reality, along with Gnosticism in general. So Dark City follows protagonist John Murdoch, who wakes up in a seedy motel room with no memories and a dead prostitute with spiral markings cut all over her skin. Murdoch soon receives a phone call warning him that he should leave the room since he will be captured. Soon, a group of nefarious-looking individuals called the Strangers hunt him down, but he succeeds to escape. This movie is very similar to The Matrix, where Neo receives a phone call warning him to try to escape, and then soon finds he is hunted by the Agent Smiths. And both the Strangers in Dark City and Agent Smiths of The Matrix represent basically the same entities. They are the controllers of humanity in a false simulation. So anyway, the name of the place that John Murdoch lives in is called Dark City. Down the line, Murdoch figures out that he can never leave Dark City. It is a fake controlled realm that was created by the Strangers, and all of his fellow inhabitants are a part of their grand experiment, where the sun never rises, and every night at midnight, each person falls asleep unconscious and is inserted with new memories upon waking up. However, there's a few characters that manage for whatever reason to keep some of their previous memories, such as Detective Bumstead, who is a detective who's searching for John Murdoch, and he's someone who's starting to question his reality a bit as well. So in this movie, we can already see that some of the inhabitants are almost like more real than others. There's certain scenes in the movie where we see the dialogue of certain denizens of Dark City, and they talk like NPCs. Their dialogue sounds like something out of a cheap video game. Then we also have Dr. Schreiber. He is a human living inside of Dark City, but he also secretly works with the Strangers. He's actually the scientist who gives all these people their new memories each night, and he's agreed to help the Strangers so that he can keep his memories. We later discover the point of the Strangers' experiment is they're trying to figure out how the human soul works, because they're a dying species and they believe that the human soul can save them. So what they're looking for are the memories of these people that they are experimenting on, because they believe that the secret to the human soul exists in our memories. So yeah, just to recap, the Strangers have created this artificial realm called Dark City, and they somehow were able to take human subjects and drop them into Dark City and then experiment on them and harvest them. And this, of course, is a similar analogy to what we see in Gnosticism, how our realm is a false simulation created by the demiurge, and we are mind-wiped to come back here and reincarnate over and over again, like also what the Cathars believed. It's also akin to Carlos Castaneda's work. He was an American writer from the 1960s who tutored under a wise shaman named Don Juan. And Castaneda discusses parasitic beings who exist in an unseen dimension in our world, and they feed off of what he calls the glowing coat of awareness. And he discusses how we originally come from Source, but we've been brought to this realm, and even though we still have our original souls, these parasites have given us their mind in order to ensure we're a good food source. He calls this a parasitic foreign installation. It's basically like our ego. This mind creates conflict, confusion, depression, fear, anger, guilt, and all the negative moods. And this parasitic mind has overruled our true mind, which was in us before the parasite was installed. And this reminds me of what happened to John Murdoch in Dark City, because one of the Strangers says to him, "Your imprint is not agreeable with our kind." Like the Strangers, they tried to imprint their test subjects, but for some reason Murdoch rejected it, and he started to become a real human being with memories. Now in his book, Castaneda tells us how we can become free from these predators, and the key is to not go out and try to fix the world, but focus on oneself, to discipline ourselves to the point where they cannot touch us. And I believe this is why in Dark City, when John Murdoch started to first wake up and he went missing, Dr. Schreiber said wherever John is, he is searching for himself. And when John started searching for himself, that's when he was able to battle and fight back against the Strangers. Now you also might remember in the beginning when I said that there was the dead prostitute in the motel room with the spirals engraved into her body. Now there's a very popular TED Talk out there where this researcher talks about the most common Neolithic cave drawings. throughout the entire world of caveman cave paintings, there seems to be a pattern where the spiral is the most prolific symbol sketched by our Neolithic ancestors. And the spiral is a metaphor for the labyrinth of the journey of going inwards. So I believe that's why it was engraved on the prostitute in Dark City. And a lot of people speculate that Dark City was meant to be the prelude to the movie The Matrix. If you recall, in The Matrix, it's mentioned that there was a one before Neo. And John Murdoch follows pretty much the same script, where he awakens to the truth of his reality, and he's able to manipulate that reality and fight against the strangers. In Dark City, Murdoch's manipulation of reality is called tuning. And this reminds me of The Kabbalion, where it talks about the world is mental, and it's all about mastering the mental, not the material, like transmuting the negative into good. So it's telling that whenever we master this ability to tune, that's when the strangers start to fear us, or as the Gnostics would call them, the archons, whatever evil force dwells in this realm, if you want to take that metaphorically or literally. So anyway, throughout Dark City, Murdoch alludes to the fact that he's from a different place. And he said it's so bright where we come from, like a metaphor of returning home, returning to source. Dark City was nothing but like darkness and shadows. Shadows like in Plato's cave, and nothing was real. And Plato's cave is basically an analogy for how far an individual is aware or unaware. And the objects that are casting the shadows on the wall in Plato's cave are truer than the shadow itself, yet all the prisoner knows are the shadows. And there's this one interesting part of Plato's cave that's not often talked about that I want to relate to Dark City as well, where Plato says, "The state in which the rulers are most reluctant to govern is always the best and most quietly governed, and the state in which they are most eager, the worst." Yeah, look at Dark City. Those quote-unquote rulers were as eager could get when it comes to wanting power. They wanted to harvest the souls of humans. And if the Gnostic worldview is correct, that's what we're going through. And even if you don't subscribe to that idea, just look at our Western leaders in general. Do you think that they're reluctant to rule? No. They want their power more than anything. They want power above everything else. And that includes the happiness of the people that they govern. Like the people who govern on this material plane of existence, they're bureaucrats who want power, and the strangers in Dark City really reminded me of like multi-dimensional bureaucrats, which also connects to Robert Monroe in the book Far Journeys. He was the first to coin the term loosh, which is the energy harvested from us. And he described it as a constant tweaking process, like a gardener growing the optimal tomato, trying to figure out what fertilization methods create the optimal output. And in order to accomplish this, several resets had to occur. And in Dark City, it's the same thing. The city would reset every night at midnight, because the purpose of a reset is to create more negative energy to harvest. So yeah, I definitely think that Dark City was an analogy for Gnosticism. Like the main character, John, maybe that's like from the Apophthegm of John. I'm reading a book right now called Exit the Cave, Ending the Reincarnation Trap by Howdy Mikowski. And I discovered that he also talks about Dark City a bit in his book. And he brought up a few interesting points that I didn't think of. Like Dr. Schreiber, the scientist in Dark City, was actually named after a real person. He was a German who wrote a book about a mental breakdown he had in 1903 when he started to see the truth of reality. And it's a journal that many psychiatrists use today in their field, but if you actually look at what this German was saying, it's like he was starting to see the truth of reality. So yeah, the director of this movie added a lot of deep stuff into Dark City. I am willing to bet the director has read Carlos Castaneda. Like when the strangers die in Dark City, a parasitic entity comes out of their head, which really reminds me of the parasitic firmware that Castaneda talks about in his books that's installed in people. And learning this actually ironically made me like humanity even more, because a lot of people believe, humanity should be wiped off the face of the earth because of how bad we act and how evil humans are. But the fact that we're able to act as so many of us are able to act as sane and rational and loving as we do with this parasitic firmware installed is probably a miracle. So yeah, if any of this resonates with you, Castaneda recommends cultivating an inner silence inside of yourself to make your glowing coat of awareness unpalatable to the predators who feed off of energy. If you don't want to take this literally, it still applies to cultivate an inner silence, to protect yourself against people in your life who you feel like are energy drainers. It would be the exact same thing. It would have the same utility. Castaneda emphasizes that we don't attack them, we make it so they don't like the taste of our energy, so they stop trying to eat it. He says, and I quote, "The grand trick is to tax the predator's mind with discipline and inner silence, and the foreign installation will flee." It's like these predators feed off of our thoughts, and maybe that's where the term food for thought comes from. I actually also got that from Makowski's book, and I have an exciting announcement to make. I'm actually going to be interviewing Howdy Makowski on this channel November 22nd at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're going to have a great live stream discussing his new book, and we're going to do a deep dive into these subjects. He's a really popular spiritual teacher and author, so it is a total honor to be able to interview him on this channel. So anyway, hopefully you got something from this and you'll go out and watch Dark City. If you like the movie The Matrix, you'll like Dark City. I do highly recommend it, even with all the spoilers I told you. So alright, thank you for listening.